All right, everyone. I'm excited to introduce my next guest, actor, director, writer, producer, beloved is Richard Rickover on Leave It to Beaver, one of the most prolific directors in the world. Welcome to the show, Rich
Thanks.
Correll. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. So great. Glad to have you here. And
Thanks, man.
got quite a history and backlog of amazingness.
I've never heard it put quite that way.
I don't know how else to put it. You keep digging and there's like, oh, and he did, and he did.
Yeah, I was around a long time. I was very, very, very lucky. I've been in show business now for 69 years. I started when I was 8 years old, so you can do the math. I'm not exactly a kid, but when I was a kid, I was raised in a show business family by my dad, who he and his partner were the most successful radio comedians in history, they were Amos and Andy. My father was Andy. Now, people don't talk about that much anymore because those were two white guys playing black guys. So that's a taboo thing now. But in those days, they were such big radio stars that everybody in the whole Hollywood community respected them and loved them. And we had a great time. And we lived in this house that was like Downton Abbey. Seriously. It had a butler and a cook and a maid and a governess and all of that kind of crap, which my dad called crap. It was funny. My mother loved all that stuff, and my dad was like, But the thing that was really cool is it was a very large property. It was over 3 acres, and it was surrounded by a neighborhood of A-list movie stars. Now, when I tell you who they are, you're literally going to think I'm making this up, but it started with Sonia Henney, who was the skater for 20th Century Fox, a famous skater. Then it went to Alan Ladd. Then it went to Lana Turner. These are all our neighbors, not down the street a mile. These are our next door neighbors. Then Judy Garland, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, Gloria Graham, and she was married to a guy named Cy Howard, Sammy Cahn, the songwriter, Jerry Lewis, Carol Burnett, and Walt Disney, and then the people who founded the Bank of America, the Gianninis. Now, those were our immediate neighbors, and I spent, as a kid, a lot of time with those guys, especially people like Disney. Now, Disney was a really good friend of my dad's, and so they were pals for a long time. Disney used to come over to our house, and, I was always tunnel visioned because I don't remember much about Lillian, his wife. I do remember about him, but he would come over and, I was this little kid and I would draw stuff for him, and it was terrible. My drawing is still terrible. It's like stick people. It's terrible. So I'd give it to him and he would go, oh, that's great. That's great. So he put me on his lap. We had a bar, like a bar in a restaurant. He put me on his lap and he'd take his hand and he'd go like this and draw Mickey, and then he'd draw Donald and all this stuff. And by the way, this was on like school paper, like loose leaf paper. Problem was, I would go up to go to bed, and at the end of the night, the maids would come in and throw all that stuff in the trash. So I have, a couple of things that he did, but not like we used to do. Anyway, in 1955, he also invited us to the opening of Disneyland. We went with him, and my sisters and brother stood 16, 17 feet away from him when he actually dedicated the park and walked in. So we were like very, very close to him. My experience at Disneyland was I was literally one of the first people to ever set foot into it. And that was 1955, so 70 years ago.
That's amazing. As you started listing off all those people, I was like, wow, that must have been a hell of a Halloween to go trick-or-treating around the neighborhood.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, Judy Garland was my next door neighbor, and I would go next door and play football with Johnny Luft. Now, she was married to Sid Luft at the time. So Johnny Luft was her stepson, and Lorna and Joey and Liza Minnelli were all living there. So I'd go over. I didn't spend a lot of time with them because Lorna and Joey were a lot younger than me. So, but Johnny was my age. So I'd go over and Sid would come out and throw the ball, and, we'd be playing football and Cowboys and all this other stuff. One afternoon, we went into the kitchen, and Judy, and by the way, we never called her Judy. We called her Mrs. Luft. Everybody was really polite. You couldn't do that as a kid. You had to call them by their last name. But she was in the kitchen making soup. And so Johnny and I came in, And we sat down and we started eating cookies or crackers or something. And Johnny got up to go upstairs for something. And I was down there alone with her. And I said, Mrs. Luff, I saw your movie the other night, Wizard of Oz. And in those days, when we were little kids, we all thought that was a black and white movie because nobody had a color TV. So, we didn't realize it was in Technicolor. But anyway, I said to her, I saw that movie of yours last night. And she went, oh, that's great, honey. Thanks. And I went, like, can you sing me that song? And so she sang the first stanza of Somewhere Over the Rainbow while I was eating cookies and she was making soup in her kitchen. 100% true. Just the two of us.
That's amazing. Love that. And I think this is now like the fourth time Lorna Luff's name has come up on the podcast. Usually it's in context to Grease too, because I'm a huge fan. She was great.
Yeah. Lorna was a little kid then. She was very, very, and her brother Joey was even smaller. I had a lot of cool experiences with the neighbors, but one of the other cool things is across the street was Alan Ladd. I told you that. He had a son named David who wasn't exactly my age. He was a year older, but his mom was an actress named Sue Carroll. And Sue Carroll had made a movie with my dad in 1930 called Check and Double Check. She was the leading lady in it. And she loved my dad. And she liked my mom. She thought my mom was great. So the two mothers decided, let's get the boys together. David was polite. There was this gap of 1 year. I think he had his own friends and his own agenda. He was kind of like tolerating the younger guy. But what was really cool is when we went over there, and I didn't know what to bring, so I decided to bring some toys over. And Mattel had just put out this thing called a Fanner 50. It was a cap gun that you would like fan, and it would shoot, bang, 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 bang. So I took it over there, and he had one. So the both of us had it. So, it was like, okay, well, one of the things we can do is like run around and shoot at each other, shoot caps. We went to the backyard. We were goofing around. And his dad, Alan Ladd, who still looked great, it was 1957, was on the back porch, like reading the paper. So I walk up to him with the guns on and the whole thing. And David as well. And I say to him, so Mr. Ladd, you were Shane, right? And it was so cool. He just looked at the two of us and he put the paper down and he stood up and he went into this stance like he had a gun on, even though he didn't. It was like his finger. And he said, okay, show me what you got. Like Shane. And we went. So we reached for our guns, and then he pulled it out much faster, obviously, and went bang, bang. But it was so loud. It actually scared me. I mean, I was trying to get the gun out of the holster, and he already shot. And it was like, and David was laughing. And then he smiled at us, and he went, yeah, I'm Shane. It was like so cool. And then he kind of picked up the paper and walked off, and I thought, at the age of 9, I was gunned down in my neighborhood by Shane. That was really cool. So you see, I had Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz on one side and Shane on the other side and Philip Marlowe on this side and Jerry Lewis on the other. It was crazy good. Really fun.
That's amazing. It's kind of cool that you got to see them like as just people though. You know what I mean? Like, except when Judy starts singing or Alan Ladd becomes Shane. But like in between those moments, it's like she's making you soup.
You're right, Jeff. And the thing that you're right about is that, and this was something that always struck me, is like we were never interested, nor did we have any part of, problems these people had. Well, when I saw Judy Garland, she was completely sober. She wasn't popping pills and drinking. And the same thing happened to Alan Ladd. When we saw him, he was vital and looked great and was really, really nice. I can remember when I went to visit Peter Bogart and people like that, I can remember that Humphrey Bogart was sick. My recollection is that he moved slow. Then he had to be in a wheelchair, that he had a much younger wife, which he did. I mean, that's my recollection of him, just because at the time I went there, that's what it was. But all these other people, that you hear about who kind of self-destruct, that was not our relationship with them. A lot of them came over and they were sweet and kind and nice. and fun and funny. It wasn't part of, oh, what's the dirt? What did somebody do that was wrong? We didn't live like that. We just went over to visit these people and have fun, and they were always nice to us. I mean, look, we were kids, and some of us were kids dealing with their kids. So, what's not to be nice about? I don't have bad memories of any of those people, but like with Judy, it just couldn't have been better. I mean, she was so nice to me. It was crazy.
I love that. That's amazing. Was Walt Disney kind of chill when he's just sitting there drawing for you?
Walt Disney was the single most tunnel visioned guy on kids I ever saw. When my parents had parties and we did a lot of entertaining, that's just the way my parents were. They just did a lot of entertaining. And most of it was celebrity entertaining. Walt Disney would come over with his wife. Now, when my parents' friends came over, I knew the wife and I knew the husband, Mr. and Mrs. Callan, Mr. and Mrs. Werlow, Mr. and Mrs. I knew them as well as I know anybody because we saw them all the time. But Lily and Disney, I have no recollection of any kind, because when he would come over, I was just tunnel vision on Walt Disney. And he was a guy that would go, "Oh, so Rich, what are you looking at in school? And what are you reading? And, what do you watch on TV? And what kind of games do you play? And what kind of stuff do you do in the backyard?" And so he wanted to always know what kids liked. Obviously that was his bread and butter, but he never, and people have said forever he was kind of this perennial youth. That's 100% true. I mean, I think this guy in real life, I think his favorite stores were toy stores. I'm not kidding. I mean, he was just this guy that was really, really perennial. The only problem with Walt Disney is he just never stopped smoking. He would light one cigarette with another cigarette. He just always was smoking. And in those days, like when my dad smoked and my mom didn't, but we had parties in the house, everybody smoked. Nobody thought anything about it. So no one thought, Walt Disney's going to smoke himself to death, which he did. To us, he was like, we called him, he wanted us to call him Uncle Walt. We would go to his house. He had a house on a street called Carrollwood, and he had this miniature steam train called the Carrollwood Express. I rode on that thing a bunch of times as one of the neighborhood kids. And about, 15 years ago or 14 years ago, they brought me up to the Presidio in San Francisco to give us a talk about Walt Disney and knowing Walt Disney and his family. And the Carrollwood Express was actually at the Disney Museum. And so I said, hey, I was like in seat 3 here, riding around as a little kid. Here it is again. And then they had some pictures of the building of Disneyland. The building of Disneyland, the guys that designed it was a guy named Charles Levine and a guy named Nat Weinkauf. Nat Weinkauf was one of our best friends, and he was a friend of Disney's. And they had pictures of people, and it said, Charles Levine, blah, 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 unknown person. And I said, guys, that's Nat Weinkauf. He was one of the designers of Disneyland. And so they went back, they changed the placards, and now Nat's getting credit. And he was a close friend of ours as well.
That is so cool. I've never been to Disneyland, but Disney World is like my favorite place.
Yeah, that's awesome, that place.
I just love it. All right. Yeah, that must kill you that he was drawing on your drawing, and that it hurt me when you just said it. That's crazy though. So, all right. So it wasn't uncommon for you to just kind of have all these super famous people around, and you were aware of their fame. Sounds like, I mean, if you're watching The Wizard of Oz, like you're like, these are famous people. Is that
here's the deal. We were very, very, very used to celebrities. My brothers and sisters realized who they were. When Hopalong Cassidy would come along and spend time with us, and he was a very close friend of my dad's, Bill Boyd. We just thought, oh my God, we're in heaven. We have Hoppy here. This is so great. But what I'm getting at is that we knew who they were and what they did. And we were never like intimidated by them, but we were always respectful and kind of in awe. I can remember one afternoon, this property had a natural canyon, and my dad used to barbecue chicken on Sunday afternoons during the summer, and that smell would waft up through the neighborhood. It was fantastic. And I can remember watching The Mark of Zorro, the 1940 film with Tyrone Power, Linda Darnell. And we came down to the Canyon for a chicken dinner, and Tyrone Power was there. We just saw him in the movie. And my brother ran up to talk to him about sword fight. And I was kind of like, I don't know. It was weird. It was kind of like, weren't you just on television? It was like really strange. Anyway, to answer your question, yeah, all of us we got very used to growing up with celebrities, I was never nervous around any celebrities. And I can tell you, I met a lot of my heroes, people like Boris Karloff and the Marx Brothers and Jack Benny and Bob Hope. And we used to see all those guys. But the only celebrity I was ever nervous to meet, and I mean nervous to meet, because to me, this guy was the biggest star in the world, was Stan Laurel. Stan Laurel was, I grew up loving his stuff. And we kept saying to our parents, hey, we want to meet Stan Laurel. Is there anything you can do? Can you figure out a way to meet Stan Laurel? And I was like, oh yeah, boys, we'll figure it out. We'll do it. I had a friend named Robert Foster, whose dad, Norman Foster, was a pretty successful director. And then his aunt was Loretta Young. His uncle was Ricardo Montalban. They came from a show business family, and Mrs. Foster had arranged for us to meet a lot of people, but we wanted to meet Stan Laurel. So we waited and waited, and nothing went on. And then one day a friend of mine called me and said, hey, I want you to do yourself a favor. And I said, what's that? He said, I want you to look in the white pages. Remember that when we used to have phone books?
Oh, yeah.
Look in the white pages of Santa Monica, Laurel, Stan. No. That can't be. That can't be. And so we said, okay, we're going to call him. And I had two other friends that I was going to high school with who were huge Laurel and Hardy fans. So everybody was nervous. Everyone was nervous. So they go, Rich, you call him and we'll be on the extension line. Remember this, extension lines? So I call this number, and here's how this goes down. It's like this. Hello? And I go, Mr. Laurel? Yes. The Mr. Laurel? He goes, I hope so. I'm the only one here. And I went, oh, Mr. Laurel, hi, my name's Rich Correll. Never heard of you. Oh, sorry. Well, I'm a student and I'm calling so that I can see you. But how can you call and see me at the same time? No. See, I want to make an appointment. Well, I'm not a dentist. No. But what I'm trying to do is, see, I'm a fan. I thought you said you were a student. All right. I'm a student who's a fan who's calling to try to make an appointment so I can meet you. And he goes, well, why didn't you say so? I'm telling you, it was literally right out of one of the movies. My friends are laughing. And by the way, his voice was exactly the same as it was in 30, 31, 32. So what happened was we made an appointment to go see him, and he lived in Santa Monica on Ocean Avenue in a place called the Oceana Apartments. We made an appointment to go see him, and that turned into this thing where we would go back a number of times. He would send us stuff in the mail. I can remember my mom bringing the mail to me and go, oh, you got something from Stan Laurel. I was like, what? So he would write us these letters, and he never forgot the people he met. And when we met him, he said, give me your address, give me your phone number. And he was like, oh, okay. And then, I still have all that stuff, letters from Stan Laurel. He sent me an audio tape. I told him that I collected the Laurel and Hardy movies, especially the silence, from this company called Black Hawk Films. And he sent me scores that people would send him that he didn't want for something, like scores to the silent movies, and go, dear Rich, try to sync this up with the film, from Soup to Nuts or Tutar, see if it works. And it's like, signed, Stan Laurel. I was like, what? So that's the only guy that I was ever nervous to meet, was Stan. And of course, the nicest guy in the world.
That's amazing. I think the only person I ever started shaking when I met was Henry Winkler, because I think my brain's like, you are in front of the Fonz right now. And that was just my visceral reaction. I was
with Henry for 6.5 years.
I know. You did all the Happy Day stuff. Were you with Brian Levant? Those are the Brian Levant.
Oh, sure. Of course. Fred Fox and Brian Levant. Yeah, they just put a book out.
Yeah, I had Brian and Fred on to talk about the Happy Days 50th book. And then I had Brian back again, and we dove a lot into Still the Beaver, the new Leave It to Beaver, and all his other stuff, non-Happy Days stuff that he did.
We all worked together for a long time. The guy that directed most of the Happy Days half hours was a guy named Jerry Paris. Jerry Paris played the next door neighbor on the Dick Van Dyke Show. Actually, his name was Jerry as well in the show. He didn't like anybody. He was this kind of crusty, kind of nasty, but funny guy. He didn't like anybody, but he loved me, Brian, and Fred. He just loved us, so that the stuff we could get away with him was unbelievable. Because he'd, I'm staying here, everybody, I'm going, oh, hi, guys. It was so funny. And then after the show, sometimes I would go back and knock on his dressing room door and just sit and talk to him about, Van Dyke and Beaver and the old days. And he just loved that. And so I loved Jerry. I thought Jerry was, I ended up directing, and Jerry was influential to me. He died young. I really, really liked him. A lot of people thought he was crazy, which he probably was, but to me, he was really nice. And so once I got to know him, it was a pleasure to be around him. So I missed Jerry. I thought he was great. And he did a good job on that show, obviously.
He did a great, great job. Yeah, I remember Brian and Fred. They had nothing but positive things to say about him.
Because he loved them. He loved Brian and he loved Fred. He hated most of the writers. He hated most of the staff. He hated most of the crew. But he loved us. It was like fun. He liked the cameramen, because the cameramen were kind of old duffers. And so they were kind of contemporaries. Actually, they were older than he was. But he was respectful of that. He liked the cameraman. But, for him, everything was a pain in the ass. And until we would show up. And then it was like hearts and flowers. And the guy was just the nicest guy.
That's awesome. Yeah. Brian talks about a lot how those Happy Days years helped helped him eventually become the writer director. That
sure.
Yeah. So when you were at Happy Days, so you were a producer and a writer on Happy Days?
Right. That's right.
What does a producer do?
Well, in my case, I was line producing and associate producing. So let me explain what that is. The line producer is the person who deals with the staff, deals with the crew, deals with the union, deals with the budgets, which is always something that the studio is very wary of because they don't ever want to spend any money. They deal with the staffing. And again, everything's union, so they have to make sure the unions are happy. The associate producer job, which I also did, was 100% post. Now, what that means is Happy Days was shot on 35 millimeter Eastman negative, color negative. Nothing was digitized. Nothing was done on video. That stuff was all shot on 35 millimeter, sent to the lab, developed, work prints were made. The work prints were edited. They're called edge note, keynote on the side so that the editors could put them back together again. And we had a thing called a 3-gang synchronizer, which was a moviola that ran 3 strips of film at one time so that we could do all of that. Now that was about sound, music, getting everything done at the lab. Everybody at these labs knew me. It was so much fun. I was having so much fun. It was always nuts and bolts what I was doing. So the producing thing, as well as the associate producing thing, was always about the nuts and bolts and stuff. How does the crew look? How are the union hours working? What's the schedule the AD is going to put out, et cetera, et cetera. How do we make it work for the cast? How do we make it work for Jerry? That kind of thing. And then the associate producer was, hand me everything that you shot, literally on show night. And I'm the one that's got to get it on television right from the beginning to the end. And so, it was so much fun. It was a big responsibility because there was so much money tied up in it, and it was such a big hit. But that was really fun. The writing end of it was because of Fred. Fred asked me maybe a year before I wrote on Happy Days if I wanted to write a show with him. He was moonlighting on a show, and I think the name of it was either Here's Boomer or Boomer. It was about a dog. And he said, do you want to write this thing with me? And I said, sure. He said, I can get you into the guild. And I went, okay. So we wrote this script together. Guys liked it. They shot it as an episode. Fred went to the Happy Days guys and said, look, Rich is doing fine. I want to write with him as a partner. And not all the time. Fred wrote most of his stuff as a solo guy. It wasn't with me. He said, I want to write some scripts with Rich. And we ended up writing some stuff. And the two most significant things, and this was really cool, because we were, he got me in the guild. I was able to become a writer sitting at the table. I could do, I would be sitting at the table listening to notes, pitching jokes, and then someone would come in and say, hey, Rich, you have to approve this. At 2:00, they're going to approve a timed cut of the show. You got to go. So I was going back and forth, but I was having so much fun. The two things that were really cool was, one, we wrote this 200th episode, which was called Hi-Yo Fonzie Away, where Fonzie meets the Lone Ranger. Fred and I wrote that, and, we pulled out all the stops and had a great time. And the fact that I hadn't been around for that many years as a writer, but they handed us the 200th episode was really cool, really nice. And the other significant thing is we wrote an episode called A Little Case of Revenge. And A Little Case of Revenge starred Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks had been on Bosom Buddies. I produced the pilot of Bosom Buddies. So Tom and Peter and Donna and all those people were friends of mine. Tom still calls me Rocket Rich because I was on a football team. I was on the Laverne and Shirley football team, and they were on the Bosom Buddies football team. And he was supposed to cover me as an end, and he never could because I would run away from him. He'd go, I can't cover this guy. He's a Rocket Rich. So Tom Hanks and I for 50 years have called ourselves Rocket Rich and Rocket Tom. So Tom Hanks comes on to do this show about a guy who wants to take revenge out on Fonzie, and he's like a kung fu guy. And they just it was one of the best episodes they ever did. Obviously, it's classic now because Tom's in it. But the other really nice thing, remember I told you Jerry Paris was nice to me and Fred? Ronnie Hallen, who was Gary Marshall's sister, not Penny, Ronnie. She was older than Penny. She was there as one of the producers, and she said to Jerry Paris, you should let Rich come on stage because he made this kung fu film that is really funny and Gary liked it. You should let him come on and pitch you a whole bunch of jokes and gags and everything else. So I said, she said, come down and do that. And I said, what's Jerry going to say? And she said, Jerry's fine with it. And I went, okay. Then what I need is the practical effects guy, the prop guy, and meet me on stage at 12:30. And I went to Jerry first. And I said, Jerry, I want to pitch a bunch of stuff, but I'm not going to do any of it unless you approve of it. If you think it's funny, then we should try to make it. If you don't think it works, we'll do something different. So I didn't walk in and go, oh, I'm going to do this. But the fact that Jerry Paris let an outsider come in and direct with all these gags, because I was, if you look at my career, I was a big physical comedian guy, Urkel and Perfect Strangers and, Full House. I did a lot of that stuff. This was early on, and Jerry just, again, he thought I was helping him in the show. I'm sure he took credit for a lot of it, which is fine, but he wasn't nasty about it, and he could have been. But, Ronnie said, hey, look, come down and do some stuff. You know all this stuff, just do it. And I went, okay. So that was another great Happy Days thing, especially since it was all being done with Tom. Like Tom was standing next to us, and I'd say, Tom, think you can kick and break a chair if it's a breakaway chair? Yeah, I can do that. And he would show me, and it's Tom Hanks. So it was like, that was super awesome. That was really fun. Great memory of Happy Days.
I love that. It's so cool. I was on your producing list besides Laverne and Shirley and Bosom Buddies, which I was going to ask about. So you did the pilot, but the other one I was just like, oh, damn, this is royalty. Police Squad.
Yeah. You're not, that's the thing that everybody wants to talk about. And in my career, I've had people say to me, all right, what's the best show you ever worked on? What's the most fun you ever had? What was the hardest? What's the easiest? What's the so stuff? The most fun I ever had was Police Squad. And the fact that it was only 6 episodes is heartbreaking because it was so much fun. And it was now it's a big cult thing. When we did it, of course, it was long before the Naked Gun movies. Going to work on that show getting up in the morning and driving in and going to work on that show was a pleasure. It was a blast. Leslie Nielsen and Alan North were literally two of the nicest people I've ever worked with. Leslie Nielsen and I, every morning, had a greeting. Like I would come on and go, Mr. Nielsen. He would go, Mr. Correll. And we would sit and go, he always carried a machine it was a fart machine. It would fart. He had this farting thing in his pocket. And he would meet new people and go, hi, I'm Leslie Nielsen. And people would go, and the crew got hysterical. But this is the kind of stuff he did. And he was, basically, this is how he got cast, as he was a dramatic actor. That's how he got cast in Airplane, because he wasn't known as a comedian. And Abrams Zucker, Jerry Zucker, David Zucker, and Jim Abrams, who were fantastic, very sweet, really nice. Man, they were great guys to work for. I missed Jim a lot. I mean, they were just the best. But anyway, those guys were really, really creative and really, really funny. Really funny. So once Nielsen got thrown into that mix, he became this, super well-known comedian. And he had spent his life as a dramatic actor with Shakespeare and drama and, a leading man. And suddenly now he's this goof. And and by the way, he loved every second of that. He just had so much fun. But Police Squad, this is great. You'll love this. We would get notes. Somebody would call me at like midnight in a panic. Rich, you got to call the optical house. All right. So I call the optical house. We're on the air in 2 days. So, and by the way, again, these are 35 millimeter prints. This isn't digital stuff. And they would say, oh my God, we made a terrible mistake. I said, what's the mistake? And they said, well, there's an optical of the Eiffel Tower and the text under it says Hong Kong. And I would go, no. That's okay. That's what it's supposed to say. And it was like, what? And then they would do stuff like we would have Leslie driving in the car behind a process screen, and the process is showing him driving. And then he'd say stuff like, then I headed back to the office, and he'd be like this, and the process would be in reverse. So it's just driving backwards. But again, all of that was done on purpose, and it drove a whole bunch of departments crazy. The music department, the optical department, the post-production department. They would get these things like, a doorway that said police written in one way and squad written the other way. And they'd go, oh my God, the painter made this terrible mistake. It was like, no, he didn't. This is how we're making this show. What a blast. I'm telling you, man, that was the best. Oh, I had so much fun.
I had David Zucker on. He was talking a lot about how the brilliance of just, all right, act like you're not in a comedy. That's what, what I mean? Like,
oh yeah.
It was such a brilliant take. And like, I was watching a different comedy recently and I was like, I'm not finding this funny. And I go, because he knows he's been a comedy. The way they were delivering the lines, it didn't feel right. And so,
and that's the thing about Leslie. Leslie got hired to do Airplane because he was a dramatic actor. They didn't want comedians. Peter Graves wasn't a comedian. And none of those guys were comedians. Julie Haggerty wasn't a comedian. That was really cool that those guys did that.
So brilliant. So brilliant. I mean, you produced Full House and then later directed the hell out of all the Fuller House episodes, Step by Step with Suzanne Summers. Said, let me go back a minute in time to acting, because I do want to talk a little bit about Leave It to Beaver. I know you did a little bit before Leave It to Beaver. I'm guessing that's a lot what people know you as, because it's more of a visual thing. Even though you directed you're like the number one director in the 90s, but it's all behind the scenes, right? So I mean, when people go like, "Oh, you were Rich from Leave It to Beaver,"
that happens all the time. People want to know about Beaver all the time. I made a number of television shows, American television shows, before I started Beaver. Bonanza was a huge hit. We got to work with Dan Blocker, who was a great guy. Anytime I was on set, regardless of what I was acting in, I was usually having a really good time. It was fun to be a kid actor. And of course, with Beaver, they paid you to have fun. Jerry and Steve Talbot and all these people that we worked together with were fantastic. Another show that I did a couple of episodes. Well, I actually did either 4 or 5 episodes, but I did a couple of Lassie shows with John Provost. And John Provost is still like a really good friend of mine. Here's another. Jerry Mathers. I don't know if people realize this, but Jerry Mathers and John Provost were huge American television stars. I mean, you couldn't get any bigger than that. Every place they went, people knew who they were. Everybody recognized them. They could get into anything. These were major stars. They were contemporaries of mine, and, they were kids, but they were big stars. And both of them could have been, I'm Jerry Mathers, I'm John Provost, out of the way, everybody. Nope. They were both really super nice guys. Provost was really, really nice. I mean, I spent years with Jerry, but John Provost was really nice too. He could have been nasty, and he wasn't. If you have time, I can tell you a great story about John Provost and I on the lot.
Yeah, I love that. I had John. John was on the show. I love John. He was nice, and his wife Lori is great too.
Lori's great. John is just a super good guy. I have a lot of fun with him, and I had a lot of fun working with him. And I was like a B player. I came in to do a show for 5 minutes and leave, and he was the star of the show, and he still had a lot of time to spend with people. So anyway, we were doing this one show. I don't know if you know what my hobby is. You know what my hobby is?
Yeah, collecting.
Okay. So I collect science fiction, fantasy, and horror film memorabilia. The collection is so large that it's now the biggest one in the world. I've been collecting for 60 years almost. It's unbelievable. I've never traded or sold anything, and the stuff I have is unbelievable. Well, anyway, so I'm doing a Lassie show, and I'm, 12. We're on a lot that's called, at the time, it's called Desilu Gower, which later was absorbed by Paramount. It was originally RKO, and it was Desilu Gower. So John says to me, hey, at lunchtime, depending on the break time, do you want to go up and see them working on Mr. Ed and see how Mr. Ed talks? The talking horse. We were all kids. We knew what it was. Yeah, sure. Let's go. So he and I take off. We walk to the other end of the studio, and and the Mr. Ed is like on stage 12. And so we go in, and it says close set, but it's John. So when John walks in, everyone goes, hi, oh, look, it's Timmy from Lassie. Oh, great. Come on in, boys. So that was really cool because everybody knew who he was. Anyway, we wanted to see them work with the horse. Now, the horse was working in a stable set, which was one of their permanent sets, with an actor named Alan Young. Alan Young was the star of the show. Mr. Ed was the horse, and Alan Young was Wilbur. Here they are working with monofilament line and making the horse. And then there's an actor basically reading the part,
Wilbur,
which they then enhanced later in post. But anyway, it could have been the dialogue coach. I don't know who it was, but they would do that for Alan Young. Okay, so Alan Young's working with the horse, and the director says, cut. And we're standing in the camera aisle, and there's a guy sitting in a director's chair, this little old man. So he gets up and he takes his makeup and he pats down Alan Young. He pats him down and he looks at him. Okay, all right. Then he goes and he sits next to us again. He's sitting in a chair. Pay no attention to him at all. Now they're watching the horse doing more stuff. And the director says, cut. And the little old guy gets up and he goes in again. And he pats him down. This goes on a couple times. So John, who's extremely professional, looks at his watch and says, we got to get back. And I go, okay. Well, this was cool, watching the horse. That was really cool. So we leave. Now, when we get back to the stage on Lassie, we go to touch-ups, the same as the little old man was doing. So we go into touch-up, and the makeup man says to us, so boys, what did you do at lunch? And John goes, oh, we went up to see Mr. Ed. And the makeup man goes, oh, did you see Jack Pierce? And I went, what? Jack Pierce? No. Are you serious? That was Jack Pierce? Now, everybody was reading Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. Everybody was friends with Forey. Everybody was watching the Universal horror movies on TV. And the guy who literally invented Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, even the Invisible Man, was sitting next to us. Not the number 2 guy, but number 1 guy. And we're paying attention to this damn horse, watching a horse. We're like, wow, that's great. Jack Pierce. And then at the end of our workday, they said, okay, boys, you're dismissed. We ran to the other end of the studio to go back and see and they had wrapped, and everybody was gone. And it was like,
oh man,
that was like, did I meet Jack Pierce? No. Did I see him? Yeah. Was he sitting right next to me? Yeah. That's one of my big regrets, is I didn't get to talk to Jack. I didn't know who it was. We all knew him from when he was a kid because of the, Fories magazine.
That's a bummer, but I mean, luckily you did get to meet 1,000 million other people.
Oh yeah. Well, I met Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, Basil Rathbone, Vincent Price, Lon Chaney Jr., all of those guys. The only one I didn't meet was Lugosi, because he died in 56 and I was just too young. I was only 8 years old, had no way of knowing who he was. And I love him. He's like my favorite of the whole group, but he's the only one I didn't meet.
It's a good group, though, that you met.
I met they were all great. And again, sweet. Karloff and Price especially were the nicest people. Just absolutely the nicest.
Bob Cummings show, is that the first thing?
That's the first thing I did, and that was 1957.
So I looked that up. Ambi Davis and Lyle Talbot were on that. Did they crisscross when you were on there?
Who was on it?
Ambi Davis, Alice.
Yep, she was there.
And Lyle.
Matter of fact, the day we had the table read was the morning after she won the Emmy for it. So she brought the Emmy to work.
That's awesome. And then Steven's dad was on that a little bit. I think he was on Adventures Ozzie and Harriet too, right?
Yeah, another great guy. Lyle. He was super nice. And then my dad was played by a guy named King Donovan. And I know who King Donovan was because of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So we had King Donovan, Ambi Davis, Dwayne Hickman, Lyle Talbot, Bob Cummings. Pretty good lineup.
That was a good line. I think Nancy Culp was on there. Rose Marie had some episodes.
No. Yeah, and I wasn't. That's not the one she did with me.
And you mentioned Bonanza, Danny Thomas show. You did quite a lineup, and then Beaver. You land the role that you'll be forever known as.
I have to tell you something about the Danny Thomas show really quick.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
When we went to do the Danny Thomas show, the first episode I ever did and Rusty Hamer and I were friends. I mean, we got to be friends. He'd come over to the house and visit and things like that. We were doing a scene in a classroom, and there was a woman there who was playing our teacher, and her name was Eleanor Audley. Eleanor Audley had the world's most famous villainous female voice. She played Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty. She played the stepmother in Cinderella. She played the head in The Crystal Ball of the Haunted Mansion. But she had this voice that when she spoke was evil, like this evil voice. And of course, she was a sweetheart. Couldn't be nicer. Oh, hi, boys, But anyway, in the scene, we're doing something. I don't remember actually, but we're doing something. And she says, boys, get back to your seats, or something like that. And acting or no acting, that was really scary. So we were like, okay, we jumped back in her chair. But she was, very sweet. But that voice, that if you watch Cinderella and you listen to the stepmother, it's just the epitome of an evil female voice. And that was Eleanor Audley, who, of course, was a sweetheart. Oh, and then the other thing that was cool about Danny Thomas is I worked with Hans Conried. I did one with him that I was in a lot of it. And Hans Conried was, Captain Hook. I asked him about Peter Pan. And he was great about that. And, he was another great character actor, but I was honored to be working with him. My dad loved him. I think he had done some radio shows with my dad, but he was really talented. And Danny Thomas loved my dad. Oh, man. Danny Thomas was a super Amos and Andy fan. Unbelievable. And, sometimes as your parents would come down as your guardian, you have to have a guardian on set if you're a minor. And my dad would come down, and if my dad would come down, Danny would go crazy. Oh my God, we've got Charlie Correll here on the set. Everybody behave. It's like, great. Really cool.
Rich, did you, growing up the way you did, I mean, with your dad, being surrounded by all that, did you have any choice but to follow the path into the world of entertainment? I don't mean, I don't mean for, but was there ever a plan B? Was there, but you just, acting just kind of took off? And
I have to tell you, my dad should have been my grandfather. He was, when I was born, he was 58. So he was with me for about 24 years. But anyway, there was never a time in our family, whether it was my mom or my dad, that anyone ever said, you should be in show business. You should be an actor. You should be a director. You should be this. You should be that. When I did the Bob Cummings show, my mother came to me and said, so was that fun for you? Did you like it? And I said, yeah, it was kind of fun. And she said, well, if you like it, we can get you an agent. And I went, what the hell's an agent? I didn't know what an agent was. But my parents were never, ever like, show business parents. Never. They never lived vicariously through their kids. They didn't have to. They didn't care if we were in show business, any of us. My brother and I were both entrenched in show business, but not because we were being told, yeah, you got to do that. Not at all. And as a matter of fact, I was just laughing the other day with my wife because we were in a Chase bank, and a lot of the employees wrote down, when you were little, what was your dream job? And I wanted to drive an ice cream truck because the guy who drove the ice cream truck, all the kids loved him. Everybody was chasing him. Everybody wanted ice cream. And I said to my dad, hey, Dad, is that a good job? Would that be a good job to do? And he went, oh, yeah, that would be fine. So he wasn't some snobby, he learned the bricklaying trade. His dad was a bricklaying contractor out of Peoria, Illinois. When he was a kid, and this was, I don't want to tell you how many years ago that was. He learned that trade, but he also learned to play great saloon piano. And the piano got him out of the construction trade and into entertainment. That was the break he got. Me, I got a great break because a friend of my brother's, and I was always a musician. I played drums and guitar, and not bad, pretty good. A friend of my brother's was leaving a position at Paramount in the music department and called me and said, do you want this job? And I said, well, who do I have to go through? And he said, well, they're leaving it up to me. And I said, sure. So I took the job as a music coordinator for Gary Marshall for all of his shows. So I got to starting to know everybody. And after 6 months, again, Ronnie Hallen, his older sister, said, look, this guy, Rich Correll, has a post-production background. He's been taking care of movies for Harold Lloyd and Clark Gable and David Selznick. He's a nitrate film expert. He understands soundtracks. He understands emulsions. He understands 35. Let's give him a show. And Gary Marshall said, okay. And they said, we're going to make you associate producer. And I said, fantastic. What show? And they said, Laverne and Shirley. Well, that was the #2 show in the country. Talk about going from zero to hero. It was like, are you serious? You're going to give me Laverne and Shirley? So, I was in the right place at the right time. And look, I worked hard. I wanted everybody to be happy with my work. A lot of due diligence, a lot of long hours and stuff. But I was always working for nice people. Gary was the best. Ronnie was the best. It's like we were talking about Brian and Fred, the best. So I was always having fun working for nice people. In my entire career, I've been very lucky to only have worked with a few people that weren't that great, but then the rest of them were really good. In my opinion, they were great with me. Some people didn't get along with other people, but I got along with them, and they were, my memories of all that is really good.
Great memory of all this. Have you written this down?
Yeah, I wrote a book called Hollywood Kid Gone Good. I've been offered a publishing thing, but I didn't like the terms very much. And I didn't like the fact that I'm not going to make any money on it, but I'd like to tour around and talk about it.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, speaking of like the film stuff, I saw a clip where you were talking about working with Peter Jackson, restoring the original King Kong.
My favorite movie.
Wow.
It was my favorite movie. I saw it when I was in the 2nd grade, and I never got over it. My wife still laughs at me because every now and then I'll be over at YouTube watching clips from it or something. It was my favorite movie. And I said to my father after I saw it, okay, I want to be in show business. because if the guys who made this movie can transport me on a television screen into a completely different world, that's the business I want to be in. Now, I wasn't making movies and monsters. I was doing sitcoms and comedy. That's the background I came from. It was a far cry from King Kong, but King Kong is the movie that I still love it. It's like a friend of mine, and it really did get me into show business because I was so interested about it. But a sidebar to that was, because I love the movie so much, I got to know everyone I could possibly know from the movie. Robert Armstrong, Miriam C. Cooper, Ernest Schoedsack, who I spent a lot of time with, Ruth Rose, who wrote it. Never met Willis O'Brien. He had passed away. But Fay Wray, she became an acquaintance, But I'll tell you what's really cool. In 1983, I produced the 50th anniversary of King Kong at the Chinese Theater because that's where they premiered it. And so we got a classic car club to meet with people at a hotel, all the celebrities, a ton of celebrities, drive them up in old cars. We built the bust that was used in the movie that was sitting in the forecourt in 1933. We rebuilt that whole thing. We restaged the whole thing. And now get this. So here I am. I'm in, tails and black tie. I take on the role of Carl Denham, which is Robert Armstrong. I introduce myself at the Chinese Theater to a packed crowd. I introduce myself. I introduce Fay Wray. She and I are hosting the evening. And so it's time now, after all the introductions and the thank yous and the people who had worked on the original movie who showed up, people like Ray Harryhausen that showed up, people like Ray Bradbury that showed up. It's time for the movie. So I go halfway down the center with Fay Wray. She goes in and sits down next to me. They start the movie, and here I am watching my favorite movie in the theater it premiered in 50 years later, sitting next to Fay Wray. This is like, are you out of your mind? I couldn't, if amazing. I wrote that, people wouldn't believe it.
That's so great.
It's so great. It was like, come on. And I'm saying to her, oh, you look so great. Do you remember when you did? And she said, oh, yeah. She was so sweet. She was just absolutely the nicest person. Anyway, that was a great night. And then across the street, we had a reception at the Roosevelt and a whole bunch of Kong artifacts, which Miriam Cooper's wife gave us, Forey gave us, other collectors gave us. We had unbelievably valuable Kong stuff, original shooting scripts, everything you could think of, even the miniature of him. Even Kong himself was there.
Are these part of your collection, or they were just there at that thing?
No, well, the Kong belonged to Bob Burns.
Got it.
I've never been able to get my hands on either of the Kongs, but you can get them if you want to spend $1 million.
Have you enjoyed any of the King Kong remakes, or are you just a purist?
What's funny is Son of Kong is a terrible movie, and that's RKO made that movie the same year because King Kong had been such a big success. That movie is really awful. And then years and years and years and years and years go by, and then the Japanese decide they're going to make like King Kong versus Godzilla, which are people running around in suits and terrible. And then Dino De Laurentiis decides, oh, in 1976, I'm going to make King Kong, remake it. That film's terrible. I mean, it's almost unwatchable. Rick Baker's work is sensational. Rick does a great job in it, but it's really a terrible movie. And then time goes by. And then these guys decide to do Kong Skull Island. And I go, oh, God, here comes the CGI Kong. Because Jurassic Park had been out and everybody, even in Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum says, what do you have behind the wall, King Kong? So anyway, they decide to do Kong Skull Island. Great movie. Great. Gorilla's great. The monsters are great. It's a really good movie. And it becomes this big hit. So then there's like Kong Skull Island Part 2. And that's a hit. And again, everybody loves it. Then comes along Kong versus Godzilla. Not great, but it makes a lot of money. These movies are making money. Then it's Kong versus Godzilla 2, Kong versus Godzilla 3. The rebirth of King Kong being that it starts with Kong Skull Island and it's a good movie made me very happy. Today, most kids don't know or care about silent movies or black and white movies or old talkies, or they don't care about stuff from the 30s and 40s. A lot of kids have never heard of Citizen Kane. They never heard of Casablanca, never heard of The Adventures of Robin Hood, that kind of stuff. But they do know King Kong because of these remakes. And the remakes are pretty good. It's not like they're terrible movies. So people keep, buying tickets to go see them. So that makes me happy, is that character has stayed alive in pop culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way about Skull Island. It was great. The whole monster verse that they
Skull Island is a really good movie, a strangely good movie. I thought, oh, this is going to be awful, and it was really good.
I ask one Leave It to Beaver question. Let's keep it in the theme. I'll keep it in the theme of Brian Levant. What was it like to come back years later with still the Beaver, and then doing some episodes of the new Leave It to Beaver, and kind of just revisit the role, but even more so revisit just the cast again and be with all these folks?
Well, when Brian gets passionate about something, it's like, uh-oh, you can't stop him. He always loved Leave It to Beaver, just like he loved Happy Days. Brian was kind of an encyclopedia on Happy Days. He knew the episodes and the names and which number was which. And so that's kind of how he was with Leave It to Beaver. And so he was the right guy to put that together. Now, originally what happened was he was going to make a film called Still the Beaver for CBS. I think the problem with that movie is that it was directed by someone who had never seen Leave It to Beaver. So I thought that was weird. And I think that choice came from the network, because I don't think it was Brian's choice either. They called me up and said, do you want to play Richard again and Leave It to Beaver? And I said, absolutely. Who's in it? Well, everybody. The only person who's not in it is Hugh Beaumont, because he passed away. I said, absolutely. This is going to be the most fun thing ever. So we go over and do the show, and Jerry and I have been friends for 64 years or 65 years. I was best man at his wedding. I talked to him less than a week ago. He's still one of my best friends. Again, here we are now having fun as friends. Doing the show was really fun. Barbara Billingsley, still our den mother. She's the nicest person. Tony Dow and Ken Osmond, who were always older than us. Wally and Eddie were older than Richard and Beaver. But in real life, rather than that gap, causing, you're the little kids. We're the older kids. You guys go over there and play. That's not how it was. They were always really nice to us, included us in stuff, took us to the movies, played basketball with us. It really was a family. So seeing everybody again was really awesome. And we just had a lot of fun. So what happens is the CBS movie is this big hit. It's huge ratings. So Brian says, I'm going to make a series out of this based on this thing. And he comes to me and said, he always liked my work. Brian liked my work. And so he comes to me and he says, look, I want you to be in the show and do 30 of them. And if you do that, I'll let you direct a bunch of them and write a bunch of them. And I said, well, the thing is right now, I'm doing step by step. So I'm already directing a bunch of stuff, and I'm already writing or producing a bunch of stuff. I don't remember if it was a cable company he was doing this for, but it was more money. It was a bigger deal to just stay where I was. But I said to him, I will appear if you want. I'll write you a couple, and I'll also appear as an actor in a couple if you want. Oh, yeah. But can you just be in more of them? Can you be around Jerry? I said, you know what, Brian? Here's the deal. I love Beaver. I'll never turn my back on it ever. I have my own career. It's not something, in other words, I wouldn't want to be with Jerry. Jerry never was not Beaver. So now Jerry was playing Beaver again. And then that would go on and on and on, which isn't a bad thing, but that's just something he didn't escape. So I said to him, I want to do something different. I don't want to be Richard. I want to be Rich Correll. And I'm already doing, whether I'm behind the camera or in front of it doesn't make any difference to me. I'd rather be behind it anyway. So I said, I'm already directing, 30, 35 episodes a season. So the carrot wasn't big enough, although they were all friends of mine. So I loved doing Still the Beaver. I thought it was awesome. Had a great time. I'm sorry Steve Talbot wasn't in it because he's a great guy and always was a great guy. But anyway, he's now kind of come around and he's doing personal appearances with Jerry and stuff like that. It's great. But doing that show was a lot of fun. It was very nostalgic. We've lost a lot of people since we've done that show. And that was all part of the Beaver family. But I just didn't want to get pegged into doing Beaver, 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 Beaver all the time. I had my own career. I was successful. Brian knew it. He kind of threw that out there hoping that I would consider it, but I just didn't want to do it. So I did as much as I could, but then I had to move on to other stuff.
Can't blame them for trying, right?
No. And I really liked Brian and I really liked Fred. Fred Fox was the other producer of it, who both were on Happy Days.
Right. It would have been great. Yeah, Steven didn't do it, but his dad, I think, had a role as a dentist or something on there. I enjoyed that. It was fun. I think when you mentioned the director for Still the Beaver, when I was talking to Brian, he said that's what drove him to become a director. Well, because it was directed by that other guy, to protect his own work, he kind of became a director.
The other guy phoned it in.
Yeah.
When the cast is saying, hey, wait a minute, whoa. That's not what I would do as this character. I would stand here, I'd move over to Beaver and say this. It just wasn't a guy that, I don't think he'd ever seen the show. I don't think he knew anything about it.
Well, that's too bad, but it was a huge hit, like you said.
It was a big hit. Yeah, big hit.
Big hit. I appreciate you spending all this time with me. I know we didn't even cover 2/3 of your career.
Well, you'll have to call me again, won't you?
Yeah, we can do that. If you're up for that, I would love to do that. That would be fun to do a sequel, because we didn't even dive into your the Hannah Montana. You co-created Hannah Montana. I mean, that was one of the shows I watched with my kid. There's certain shows when you're like, you have kids that you watch or you don't watch, and definitely Hannah Montana.
Well, I was at Disney for years doing.
Yeah, I know. You did everything.
Sweet Life, Sweet Flag on Deck, Hannah, Jesse, Bunked, Livin' Maddie, Austin and Alley, all that.
Raven, Ant Farm.
Ant Farm, I did most of them.
Quote, in the mid 90s, Rich became ABC's #1 sitcom director.
Yeah, most prolific. That's right. Yeah. Around 1994.
Yeah, you're the man. All right, we'll have you back. We'll talk. We'll do a sequel. That'd be fun if you're up for that.
Yeah, just let me know when you want to do it, and we'll do part 2.
Awesome. That would be amazing. And we'll dive into your amazing collection as well, which I watched some videos on that.
If you think I get excited about Beaver and the shows that we did as sitcoms, wait till you start talking to me about this collection. I love it. I have so much fun. I have a pitch deck that I show to people, and all the money people go, okay, you got to get Rich to show you the pitch deck. You've never seen anything like this in your life, and wait till you hear this guy's enthusiasm. I go, I've seen it a million times, right? And it's still, guys, this is so cool. Wait till you see the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park and stuff. Oh, I'm telling you, man, it's so much fun. This is what I really love. And it's cool because it's a second career for me. I'm not going to retire. I'll retire when I die. I'm starting a second career. So, and I'm really excited about it.
That's amazing. Hey, iconsofdarkness.com. If anyone wants to take a sneak peek of it, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's basically, like a museum. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, the thing here, look, before we go, I'll tell you here's what you need to do. You can go to YouTube and look up Rich Correll, Correll, and it'll say Rich Correll touring Icons of Darkness, Rich Correll showing Icons of Darkness. Or you can go to Icons of Darkness and it'll say full tour, movie stuff, real movie memorabilia. By the way, that's about 46% of the collection, which is crazy. Or, and this is the most fun, we just moved from LA to Las Vegas so that I could follow the business. It's going to be at the Excalibur in 18,000 square feet with MGM Resorts. So that's why we moved. We moved from LA. I lived in LA for 75 years and I love LA, or did love it. Now we're in Vegas to do this show. What's really fun about it is that if you look on YouTube. There's a thing that says Rich Correll's house on Halloween 2017. Okay. I've told people forever that, people come up to me and go, oh my God, we love Halloween. It's our favorite day. We do everything. We go all out. We did. And it's like, you don't know who you're talking to. It's like I'm the number one guy in the country. The biggest thing you've ever seen, 8,000 trick-or-treaters and stuff like that. It's like being at the Greek theater. But if you look at this thing that says Rich Correll's house, Halloween 2017, you'll see the setup. And we used to do an open house for the neighbors to go through the house, and then all the stuff outside and in the windows and everything. And a lot of people who saw it, a lot of people didn't realize that they were looking at the actual screen-used artifacts from the movies. Like if Batman standing there, that's Michael Keaton's suit, or Val Kilmer, or George Clooney. It's all the real stuff, which a lot of people didn't realize. But if you go to that thing, Halloween, Rich Correll's house on Halloween 2017, you'll have a blast. You will have a blast. It's not that long, but it's really fun.
I'll put links in the show notes to all that. Yeah, I mean, I saw one where it was showing the Scream hat, the Scream masks,
Freddy,
Green Goblin. Yeah, I mean,
oh yeah. I got
yeah,
Green Goblin.
yeah. I mean, speaking of Freddy, that was the Married with Children episode. We'll Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund. Anyway, we'll have you back. We'll dive in. There's a million. I have no doubt we couldn't fill 100 more hours. You're awesome. You're so awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I have a lot of fun.
Clearly, I have quite a life. I mean, it's amazing. So many great stories.